Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting to you from Washington, D.C. So today is May 9th. Today is the victory over fascism on the Eastern Front. It's the Russian version of VE Day. So here in the West, in the U.S., and in Western Europe, the 8th of May is VE Day, victory in Europe on the Eastern Front for various reasons we'll go into. Alan Dulles being part of the problem. It's the 9th of May, and we've just had the big parade in Red Square. And if you're a warmonger neocon, or if you're a warmonger progressive Democrat humanitarian responsibility to protect freak, you will have been interested to see the Topol M ICBM. You don't want to mess with that. That's got a range of 11,000 Ks. And that's a significant weapon. And they were also showcasing the AN-124 Ruslan, biggest cargo airplane in the world and second largest airplane of any kind in the world. So we had the big array of the Russian army there in Red Square with a flyover and a speech by Putin. I would recommend, if you have a chance sometime in your life to see that, you should go and see it. I've been to Moscow not on the Victory Day, but the May 1st, which was demilitarized. I was there May 1st, 1967. I heard a speech by Marshal Grechko of the Defense Ministry there, and you heard this "Ura, ura, ura," right? 3 cheers for the USSR. Now it's Russia. And then Putin flew on to Crimea, where he presided over a naval parade, a flyover, and a brief speech where he talked about the bravery and stoicism of the defenders of Sevastopol and the Crimea during World War II. This was a place that was besieged for many months and then finally taken over by the Nazi forces. But this word stoicism, you're not likely to hear anything of that philosophical level from a leader in the West. Now, I don't know whether stoicism is a good sign or not. Certainly, there's much to be said about stoicism, but we don't have time for that right now. Maybe we look at it in the future. But this is now the big day for Russia, and of course they've got the St. George victory ribbons seen everywhere, and all kinds of celebrations for this, right? And this has got a new life coming after the annexation of Crimea. The wise statesman would say, don't meddle with this. Let it be what it wants to be. However, wise statesmen are not to be found in the Kiev fascist clique. And that Kiev fascist clique, we've just had Parubi, the fascist Parubi, on television, right, talking about, well, blathering out the Kiev fascist line. This is Parubi who wants nuclear weapons, Parubi who wants parts of the territory of Poland, and somehow the Polish government so loyal, so servile to NATO that they can't figure out that the Ukrainian fascists are not their friends. That's Tusk can't figure it out, or is paid not to figure it out by Foch Rasmussen and company. So the Ukrainian fascists are on a shooting spree, and the fascists have been killing people In the coastal city, on the coast of the Sea of Azov, we have Mariupol, and in Mariupol, 20 or 25 people have been killed, and Russia today has been showing the actual films of people who are not armed. They don't have Molotov cocktails or sticks or anything. They're just out there protesting, standing around in the streets, and they get shot by the Ukrainian fascists. Is it right sector, the outright Nazis, or the Ukrainian army, whatever it is? So we can say that this week has enclosed within itself a cycle. You remember earlier this week, Putin made an appearance in the Kremlin with the current rotating chairman of the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, who happens to be the president of Switzerland, capital in Bern. So from Bern came the guy who's also the rotating chair of the committee that presides over the OSCE. And in Putin's appearance with this OSCE guy, they talked about this situation in Ukraine. Putin then came out and made a series of conciliatory offers, and those were, he called on the pro-Russian forces in eastern and southern Ukraine to delay their referendum. He announced that the Russian forces were, or had already, vacated the immediate border area. It's not clear how far that extends, of course. He called for negotiations between the two parties in Ukraine. He suggested that in the future the Ukrainian delegation include representatives from Donetsk and Lugansk and so forth. And he called upon the Ukrainian fascist regime to stop its military attack on its own cities in the west, in the east, and the south. And this obviously has not been done. So the fatuous individuals who are dominant for the moment in the West, somebody like Steinmeier of Germany, a social democrat accepting the degradation of a coalition government with Merkel. This is a monstrosity. Anyway, Steinmeier, in his fatuous, complacent superficiality, said, oh, well, this is a great thing, the tone has changed, and so forth. Yes, but it's all predicated on the idea of reciprocity, that if Putin comes out and calls on the people in Donetsk and Lugansk to delay their referendum, the quid pro quo is that the fascists are supposed to stop attacking these cities. And they've continued to attack in Slavyansk and in Mariupol and elsewhere. And they have spurned, they have repudiated that offer. So it seems to me that this entire false dawn is now reduced to nothing. And the fascist character of the government there in Kiev, the Euro-fascists, we can call them, or the Ukrainian fascist, was highlighted in the testimony of Mrs. Newland, that is to say, Madame Newland Kagan, wife of the despicable neocon warmonger Robert Kagan, top advisor to Romney, reminding us that if Romney were in the White House, we might have a world war on our hands. Romney might even now be acting out the white horse prophecy of Joseph Smith. You can read all about this in my study, Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion, that we might be at war if we had President Romney. Back in a minute. May 9th, we've got 2 days now until the referendum takes place. The 11th of May referendum in Donetsk and Lugansk. Putin has already said he doesn't want this to be held at the present time, but of course these people have a certain autonomy, right? They're not simply controlled by Putin, and they've said they're going to go ahead with it, which I think was predictable. We'll go into some of the reasons why this may have been done, but I don't think this referendum is going to be a rousing success, simply because there are relatively few places where it can be held, and therefore the number of votes is not likely to be impressive, although who knows, right? From a distance, it's hard to tell. And I think precisely this factor, the idea that this referendum is not going to be as convincing as the Crimean referendum, right? The Crimean referendum was, 90% in favor of joining Russia? In this case, I don't think it's a result like that, which may be why Putin wants to distance from it. The other problem Putin has is you can't really argue that the 11th of May referendum in these southeastern cities is authoritative and conclusive, and then turn around and argue that the 25th of May presidential election, which is going to be held in a lot of places that are much quieter for the moment than southeast Ukraine, you can't then turn around and say that's going to be invalid because of the conditions. And then there's also comparisons to other places. Comparison to Syria doesn't work, because in Syria there has not been a coup. In other words, the areas of Syria controlled by Assad have in many cases been under the continuous administration of the legal Syrian government, and that now includes Homs. We'll get to that in a minute. There's reason to celebrate on the Syrian front. The fascist, or in this case terrorist rebels, the Takfiri, the holier-than-thous, have been kicked out of Homs, and that's a big deal. Don't let some Western journalist tell you anything different. But now, back to Nuland, that is to say, Madame Nuland Kagan, neocon, and her testimony in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Questioning Nuland Kagan was Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, who is a straightforward reactionary without any of this pseudo-libertarian coloration, but he happens to be a pro-Russian or pro-peace reactionary. So he questioned Nuland about neo-Nazi groups on the Maidan. On the Maidan, were there neo-Nazi groups, he wants to know. And Nuland Kagan's response is, well, they were all the colors of the Ukraine. And Rohrabacher then concluded, well, that means there were neo-Nazis there, right? Now, remember, the official position of Yatsenyuk and the infamous Turchinov is that there are no Nazis in the Ukraine, none, except that we see, and we saw again in the last couple of weeks, a torchlight parade in Kiev of extreme fascists, dissident fascists, Nazis, who were sporting the portrait of this Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera looks like he could be the before ad for the hair club for men. But there he is, Stepan Bandera, Nazi collaborator, Quisling. I've said it before. You go to not too many statues of Vidkun Quisling, Nazi collaborator in Norway. You go to France, not too many statues of Marshal Pétain, Vichy fascist dictator, and similarly through other parts, right? Do we have monuments to the Rexists of Léon de Grelle in Belgium? I don't think we do. But in the case of Ukraine, and this is it's an exception, we've got more than 24 statues of the raving Nazi, anti-Semite, fascist, what have you, Stepan Bandera. So, not good. So, there it is. By the way, in addition to the $5 billion that Madame Nuland Kagan says we have, the United States has paid into the development of democracy. In other words, Nazis. In Eastern Europe, of course, we've seen it so many times. You can be an SS-level Nazi and you're a democratic force as long as you're anti-Moscow, anti-Putin in particular. But she now says that the United States, just in the past couple of weeks, has paid another cool $18 million to Kiev. And I guess in addition to that, another $9 million to the fascists of Kiev so they can organize their election. It takes a lot of money to print those ballots and so forth. We've also had the disgusting pornographic spectacle of the Pussy Riot forces in the U.S. Congress. Now, this is something that it comes, of course, out of the Situationist International. Right? There's a certain sense in which the Situationist International, from Adbusters of Vancouver, British Columbia, all the way to Vina in Russia, and even Limonov, right, the National Bolshevik, meaning Nazi in a slightly different form. These characters seem to be the common denominator of the subversion of world civilization by the CIA, MI6, City of London, and Wall Street. So I think some of these congressmen may be embarrassed to find that their cavorting with Pussy Riot can be juxtaposed to various photographs of earlier activities of Pussy Riot, which we won't go into here, but which are widely available on the Internet, which are, of course, scurrilous and scabrous in their content. Now, as I mentioned before, in Syria, we've got good news from Syria. The last of the terrorist killers have been ejected from Homs. The last couple of hundred die-hard jihadi, takfiri, Saudi, and Qatar-paid crazies are leaving Homs. And I have a special feeling for Homs because I visited Homs. I spent a day in Homs back in November of 2011. I was in the Zara neighborhood where people said that they were being shot at by snipers from the rooftops. They wanted the Syrian army. They wanted tanks. They wanted helicopters. They wanted Syrian army snipers on every roof to kill any terrorist who stuck his head up and tried to shoot. In particular, the terrorists like to shoot at mothers picking up their kids at school. That was one of their favorites. So that's all over, and that is a very big deal because that is the so-called starting point of this revolution. It's no revolution. It's a destabilization by the worst imperialist forces. So hats off to Homs and go Syrian Arab Army. Back in a minute. Another note on the liberation, finally, of all of the historical center of Homs, the complete ejection of the terrorist rebel forces, be they Saudi, be they Qatari, be they Emirati, whatever they are. They're all gone, and this is a huge defeat for this rebellion. It's almost a year since the fall of Qusair, the liberation of Qusair by the Syrian Arab Army and its Hezbollah allies. That was already the handwriting on the wall, and this has taken longer than one would want, but the direction of progress is unmistakable, and Homs is now going to go back to peace. Now, we want Aleppo to join Homs in the completely liberated category as soon as possible, and pretty soon we're going to have just about every city in Syria completely free of terrorist forces. Now, the various indications, Obama administration is shipping, they claim, limited numbers of anti-tank missiles and the Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. These are being given to the terrorist rebels, and they're trying to impress us with all the safeguards and biometric systems and GPS systems that they're using, U.S. CIA, trying to keep track of the Stinger missiles in particular. The first Israeli airliner or Turkish airliner that goes down, or any European, U.S., Japanese, any kind of airliner, any kind of civilian airliner that goes down under these circumstances, that's going to be the impeachment of Obama. And I'm sorry, he's asking for it. This is getting to be a terrible situation, right? This is an absolute folly, and I would strongly recommend to Obama, don't do this. That is self-destructive for you, Obama, since that's all you can understand, not just how many people it'll kill. This will make no military difference now. It's too late for that. And indeed, we have reports that quite a few of these terrorist killers have now been shipped into, you wouldn't believe it, Ukraine, and that this is a big deal. Right? Several hundred of them have arrived over there in Ukraine. So to a certain extent, some of the imperialist forces are giving up on Syria, and they're attempting to cut their losses in Syria and switch over to the Ukrainian front. Now, remember, you've got Madame Slaughter of the Obama administration and the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. She says that the vulnerability of Princeton of Putin is to be attacked in Syria. In other words, if you want to hit Putin in a place where you can hit him, and he'll have a hard time fighting back, then the way to do that is in Syria. So that's Marie Louise Slaughter, I guess her name is, intensely preoccupied with the privileges of oligarchical women, right? That they've got to have it all. But in this case, she wants to have bombing of Syria. She was one of the people, along with Samantha Power. It was Madame Slaughter who convinced Obama to bomb Libya. So she's one of the furies of the U.S. State Department and the Obama regime. So that is Syria. Now, where is this stuff going, particularly Ukraine? I will stress this again. Very simple things that everybody knew, and I think they still do know, but this is now at the level of a college textbook, maybe even of a high school textbook, maybe a grade school textbook, right? This could be your first grade reader. There are three things you need to know about Russia. The first is, these are the so-called septs, concepts, precepts, but septs that you would need to know for your European history test. First thing is, Russia wants a warm water port. Russia wants an ice-free port. Murmansk, up there in the far north, that's not good enough because it doesn't always stay ice-free. And even in the era of global warming, I don't know what it looks like, but this is for the past several centuries anyway. It's been like this. A warm water port. And what are the warm water ports? Well, Sevastopol is a leading case of a warm water ice-free port. Odessa is another one. Odessa is, remember from Battleship Potemkin, it's to some extent a basing point for the Imperial Russian Navy, and this is big for commerce and so forth. So Russia wants a warm water port, and this has been going on for a long time. Secondly, Russia is a country that has been invaded by land several times, right? And it's not just Hitler, it's not even just Napoleon, but it goes back to an invasion in the very early 1600s by Poland. and it goes back to the Great Northern War at the beginning of the 1700s against Sweden. So there are lots of cases where Russia has been attacked over land. Therefore, Russia wants to have its own cordon sanitaire. It wants to have its own belt, its own glacis, as it's called, Glacis, a belt of states, countries, nations, that are going to be not necessarily completely controlled by Russia, but friendly to Russia. That's the point. Not outright hostile. Not hostile. So this was Stalin's demand at Yalta, Potsdam. He wants to have governments friendly to Russia in such places as Poland and Hungary, Romania, places like this, and the Baltic states. Of course, he absorbed because they were potentially not friendly. Finland was invited to observe neutrality. I'm not talking about Finland today. I'm talking about Finland of Kekkonen, Finland of the 50s and the 60s, when they really were neutral. They were not members of NATO at all. They were not members of the European Economic Community at that time. So that's the second one, right? They don't want hostile states in that belt of countries that share a border with them. That's all it is. Right? Again, the United States insists on having friendly governments in neighboring states. Canada, Mexico have to be friendly. If they weren't friendly, you'd see something happen. But so far, at least recently, that problem has not arisen. Now, the first point, therefore, is warm water port. The second one is no hostile states on the Russian border. And the third one is this question that since the Second World War, the ideology of Russia, be it communist, be it whatever, is based on the Great Patriotic War of 1941 to 1945. The Great Patriotic War and its sacrifices are the legitimacy of any Russian government. So therefore, Nazism of the Ukrainian type is going to be extremely offensive. And we'll go into this more when we come back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. You got to remember to follow everything on Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. And this week, what do we have? This week, a very interesting radio broadcast. I hope you'll listen to this. That would be a good supplement to what we're talking about today with Jeff Rentz. And this was about the feudal imbecility of Eastern Europe in the 1600s. And that includes the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, and the Polish Republic or Commonwealth, but that is a very big area, including modern Ukraine, in the west at least, right, the Lvov, Tarnopol area, and it compares the oligarchical imbecility that destroyed the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, and the Polish Republic, compares that with the oligarchical imbecility that we see today in the U.S. government through things like filibusters and the paralysis of Congress, but also in the libertarian opposition, Cloven Bundy and his armed gangs. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We've got another report from the Los Angeles Times that the white supremacist armed gangs are still manning checkpoints in the Bunkerville, Nevada area. Los Angeles Times, May 7th. And Cloven's daughter says people want them, and they're still fulfilling their task. Yeah, I'm sorry. Whether people want them or not, they are interfering with interstate commerce, and they have got to be rounded up, brushed aside and rounded up. I'm sorry, but we cannot have government by armed gang, because there's a word for that. It's called fascism, and we don't want it. We can see what that looks like in Ukraine, and God forbid it should come here. Now, the simple stuff on Russia, that every neocon should have to take a remedial course in this stuff, and you might as well send in the responsibility to protect humanitarian lunatics. So crackpots, knuckleheads, and lunatics of both of the major U.S. ruling class factions. Russia wants a warm water port. If you try to take Sevastopol and indeed Odessa, you're going to see it happen, away from Russia, then the response will be energetic and don't get in the way. There's no point. Warm water port, ice-free. The second point is the glacis. In other words, there's a great desire in Russia not to have neighboring states become hostile. They don't want Russophobic governments in Warsaw, in Bucharest, in Sofia, Bulgaria, in Helsinki, Finland, or in these Baltic states, right? These godforsaken little entities. They don't want Russophobic governments. And this, I think, is a reasonable demand. It is consonant with the needs of world peace. And then the third point is that the dominant ideology, the emotional center of gravity of Russia since 1941, 1945, is the ideology of the Great Patriotic War, Velikaya Otchestvenaya Vaina. And this Great Patriotic War is objectively one of the greatest events of recent human history. And I would point you, take a look at the Frank Capra movies, Why We Fight. The Why We Fight movies by Frank Capra give special treatment. There's one of them that talks about the Russian angle in all this. And here we have statements from General Marshall, at that point the head of all U.S. land forces in the world, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or, chief of staff of the U.S. Army. We also have a statement by Frank Knox, Republican, who was the Secretary of the Navy. And they say the defense of the Soviet Union is the greatest military achievement in human history. That's number one. And secondly, that the United States will have an eternal debt, eternal gratitude through the Soviet people for defeating the Nazi forces. Well, eternal means eternal. And we would honor this today as well. So that is an objective fact of history. You can't get around it, right? That the overwhelming burden of World War II was borne by Russia, and the D-Day invasion of France, of course, is a great achievement in its own right. But when we look at the casualty figures, apart from any other consideration, just look at the casualties, you will see that things like the Battle of the Kursk salient, the defense of Moscow, and finally the battle for Berlin, these lead to casualties which are unimaginable in the Western front of World War II. So hats off to Russia for this. And therefore, why insist on offending precisely this point by funding a bunch of Nazis in Kiev? What is the point? What's the gain? What's the upside of that, one might well ask. So I think we've heard Putin talking about Novorossiya. It's the coast of the Baltic. It's Crimea. And I think it's going to include places like Lugansk and Donetsk, the coal mining, and I think Krivoy Rog and the iron, the siderurgical elements of there's a certain amount of defense industry located there. It seems to me that these are likely to be when the smoke clears, whenever that is, months, maybe even a year or two from now, you will see that these things end up under the control of Russia, and we should want it. I've told you again and again, the strength of Russia, a strong Russia, is very much in the interest of the American people because it tends to contain, compress, deter, dissuade the insanity, the inherently insane, lunatic impulses of the current U.S. ruling class, right? Be it the neocon, fascist, madman, warmonger type that we've seen and continue to see through people like Nuland and Kagan and so forth, and or the responsibility to protect humanitarian intervention types, the Samantha Powers, the people like this, right? Susan Rice. I guess she bridges both. She's the worst of both. But you get the idea that this is powerful in the Obama administration. Now, what is going on? We have to remember also the origin of this crisis is that the U.S. insisted on having a coup in Ukraine, right? The National Endowment for Democracy, as Madame Nuland Kagan has helpfully reminded us, the National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID and Freedom House and the rest of them, Albert Einstein Institute, whatever it is, they all in some way or other contributed, and it was an effort with a price tag of $5 billion to create this, not to create maybe, but to foster, to revivify, to strengthen, to mobilize this body of cancerous fascist opinion centering in Lvov and western Ukraine, the Bandera people. Why insist on this? What is the point? You got to drive the NATO limit right up to the Russian border. You want Ukraine to be part of NATO. I don't think Ukraine will ever be part of NATO. I think, as I said before, the Novorossiya will be repatriated. It will be ingathered, and what will be left will be a Western Ukrainian rump state. But that will have so many border disputes that nobody in Europe will allow it into NATO. They'll say this is a one-way ticket to World War III, because this will be the revanchist and neo-Nazi government that nobody will be able to touch with a 10-foot pole. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. And we've just, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we just had Victory in Europe Day in the West. The 8th of May, Hitler and the Nazis finished. And then today it's the 9th of May. It's the victory of Russia, Soviet Union over the Nazis on the Eastern Front. But now when we're worried about fascism, well, we've got to look here at home. And I was very impressed to see a write-up of the case of Reverend Edward Pinkney and some photographs of a demonstration he was at, and one of the posters said, "Stop fascism in Michigan." So we want to be against fascism abroad in Kiev, but we want to be against it here at home, too, in places like Detroit and Benton Harbor. And it's from Benton Harbor that Reverend Edward Pinkney joins us. Welcome, Reverend.
Oh, it's a pleasure and an honor, Webster, just to be on your show once again. I tell you, you would not believe that fascists have taken over the city of Benton Harbor.
All right. Now, I want to make sure we have some people undoubtedly joining us today who did not hear you last time. So why don't you give a quick summary of your situation right now, how we got here, and what's been happening there with Whirlpool and Benton Harbor and the emergency managers, Governor Snyder, and all the rest of it.
Well, first of all, how much time do we have here? If you want
we got about 10 minutes.
Huh?
About 10 minutes.
All right, well, that'll work. But let me start here. I'm gonna start on April 24th when I was taking my wife out to dinner for her birthday. We left here at 11:30 a.m. By 12 o'clock, I had been getting phone calls saying that the sheriff's department, the state police, the FBI, the township, and the city police had surrounded my home. More than 30 police officers, and along with the SWAT team. And I was more or less confused because I couldn't believe what they was telling me. So I immediately, once we got through eating, I went to my attorney's office and he called. He called the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor told him that he had a warrant out for my arrest for election fraud, claiming that I had changed the date on five petitions, on 5 individuals. That's what he said. And they are felonies, 5 years each. So I said, well, my attorney told him that I would come in and turn myself in on Monday morning. They said, absolutely not. We want him now. And all night long, they were driving up and down the street, trying to find out where I was at, what I was doing. They was, you have that big truck that they have, and with all the squad members in there, and they're going around town driving fast, trying to find my car. So eventually, the very next day, I turned myself in. They set bond at $30,000 cash. Plus, they said that I was going to be on house arrest 24/7. They did not want me out of my house. Matter of fact, the sheriff's department just left my house. They come here every day and check up on me, even though I'm on tether. So they must be really fearful. Also, they said I could not use the computer. We know that's a constitutional issue right there. But the point is, I didn't realize that they were so afraid of me over some petitions, recall petitions. People change and scratch out dates all the time. But yet and still, they want to make it a felony for me. But here's the good news. Once I got the police report with all the evidence and what they have, it was like a joke. But I know that they can get the right people and then convict you. We found out that the mayor himself went out and started manufacturing evidence. He went to people's home and asked them to sign a patent letter. He went to 4 people's home, asked them to sign a letter that said that I misrepresented the petition and deceived them. And that's how the investigation started. The police officer, the sheriff's department, went and talked to this lady. She said the only reason she signed the lady was to please her husband, that it was not true. But yet still, they continued the investigation. But here's what we did. On yesterday, we filed a criminal complaint against the mayor, James Hightower. We're asking them to arrest him and charge him with manufacturing evidence to set aside the election. So we are on the ball. We're doing things so incredibly that even them, it shocked the prosecutor, and he's mad now because he don't know what to do. But we brought everybody in to make sure they understand we had to do what we had to do, Webster. We have to fight these folks. We have to go at them like pit bulls do, and let them know that we're not gonna stand this man. All this over the recall of the mayor, and he used the sheriff's department. Well, they probably used each other to go after me. But Webster, I tell you this one, that is the new development, and I think it's so big that it's got this whole community shook up.
Okay, so you've got a criminal complaint against Mayor Hightower for I guess he's obstructing justice, manufacturing evidence. And just for our listeners, Hightower is the puppet of Whirlpool, which is of course a Wall Street controlled corporation. So ultimately, it's the Wall Street stock guys, right, who tell the Whirlpool management what to do, and then Hightower carries that out. And this is still under the emergency manager law in Michigan?
Absolutely. Public Act 436 now. Remember, we went out and got over 226,000 signatures to repeal Public Act 4. And they did not like that, so they came out with a new Public Act, for Public Act 436, with a little bit more teeth that says that we can't repeal Public Act 436. So now we're under what we call a four-man emergency manager. It's not one anymore. We got 4 now. And here's the deal. They can't do anything without going through these guys. If these guys say yes, it's yes. If they say no, it's no.
It's outrageous, Reverend. Let's take a minute, and how can people help you? They want to send you contributions for your legal fund. Please repeat how they can do that.
Absolutely. You can go to BHBANCO.org. That's my blog. You can go there. BHBANCO.org. And you can donate on my blog site. Or you can mail a check to Banco, BANCO, 1940 Union Avenue, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022. That's Banco, BANCO, 1940 Union Avenue, Benton Harbor, Michigan. Also, you can call the prosecutor office and tell him to free Pinckney. You can call him at 269-983-7111, extension 8311. His name is Michael Sepik. Tell him to free Pinckney. Or you can call me at home at 269-925-0001. And I think that's enough numbers for everybody. I guess it's enough to get you going.
And you're still under house arrest.
I am still under house arrest as we speak.
And they tell you
every single day the sheriff's department come by and visit me, making sure I'm in the house. I'm pretty sure they're outside the house watching. And if I breathe too high, they're in the house for some reason.
And they've got you. They force you to put on one of these
ankle bracelets. Yeah, I got a tether right around my left ankle, and believe me, they're watching. They got what they call a GPS, and anywhere you go, they know exactly where you go in your house. If you go use the bathroom.
All right, Reverend, you hang in there. Let's get you back next week. The fight goes on. More power to you. Absolutely. Next week, automatic. We want you. Bye-bye. See you soon. Hang in there. And this is the United States under Obama. Well, we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. That's Reverend Edward Pinckney in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And his website is BANCO. So it's Benton Harbor Banco, but it's on the website, I think it's just BANCO. Put in Pinckney and Banco, and you'll get some interesting coverage. Just a couple of things now to catch up with. The story on Saudi Arabia sending their terrorist killers, their Takfiris, from Syria to Ukraine is on FARS News Agency. And if you want the link, go to my Twitter feed, Webster G. Tarpley, and you will find a link from a couple of days ago on, I say basically, Prince Bandar is doing this. It's a large number of terrorist Takfiri fighters in Syria, Saudi and Chechen nationals, back up from Saudi intelligence, meaning Bandar, have been sent to Kiev, and they are being used to help the Ukrainian army fight against the pro-Russian population, said an Arab security official to FARS News Agency this past Sunday. Just a couple of notes on U.S. domestic before we get back to Ukraine. The death penalty in Oklahoma. Well, the death penalty has to end. The evolving standard of civilization is that the death penalty is cruel and unusual. Notice, cruel and unusual are to a certain extent a matter of judgment. You might say a matter of opinion, a matter of, what would they say today, evolving community standards, I suppose. Unusual it is for sure, because when you look at the developed areas of the world, in particular Western Europe, the death penalty is virtually extinct. And among the American states, it's becoming fewer and fewer states that still impose this barbarism. a relic of barbarism. So the death penalty must be ended. And one reason is that it's racist. Look at the number of black people and so forth, and don't be fooled by this fast-talking huckster from the, the Heritage Foundation, paid for by what? By the Koches, by the Coors, Fortune, whatever it is. These reactionaries can pay to set up quackademics in Washington, and then they become part of the national debate. We don't need them. The death penalty is barbaric, and it must be ended. No more death penalty. It's unusual, and it's cruel. And that, of course, is to a certain degree a subjective judgment that evolves based on the criteria inherent in the current phase of world civilization. So based on all that, it must end. And, that's the most, the leading part. Now, we'll get back to the to certain domestic questions. Oh, yeah, here's another one. This global warming report, I am sorry, the Obama administration scraping the bottom of the barrel, demagogically trying to please some Malthusian billionaire, have decided to issue this global warming report. And what I find horrifying is the immediate Pavlovian reaction of so many of these left liberals is to jump from some conclusion about global warming, climate change, greenhouse gases, whatever it is, to cap and trade. Aren't you guys supposed to be anti-Wall Street? Are you going to immediately embrace Wall Street to the extent that you're going to say, let's create a speculative market that will allow Wall Street predators, Wall Street parasites, and Wall Street speculators to profit from the so-called price of carbon? I guarantee you, if I can ever get the Wall Street sales tax implemented, then you will find that any carbon market will immediately be taxed as well. And, of course, just this past week, we've had another milestone in the struggle in Europe to impose some kind of financial transaction tax, which has now gone through another round of implementation. This was, of course, the British, the London world capital of parasitical speculation. They were, of course, complaining that they don't want the European Union to impose a financial transaction tax, but it has gone through, and that means France, Germany, Italy, Estonia, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Austria, Belgium, Slovenia, Slovakia are all headed for a financial transaction tax. Why not here? And in Canada, how about Canada? Wouldn't you do well up there? You would. So the financial transaction tax, and the main opposition comes from the parasitical usury capital of the world, the city of London, and of course some of these smaller British satellites in Northern Europe joining in. So cap and trade, in other words, Waxman-Markey. Oh God, Waxman-Markey and cap and trade is no answer to anything. Your answer to a problem is to create another dimension of speculation. This is a monstrosity. Now, if you want to take global warming seriously, sure, fine, we can do it. You can start building fourth-generation, pebble-bed, high-temperature nuclear reactors to replace the current 103 increasingly obsolete reactors in the U.S. Other countries are doing it. Russia is doing it. China is doing it big time, and on, and it could be done here. The other thing, of course, is to put more money into ITER, the World Thermonuclear Fusion Power Project. But there's lots you can do even short of these. You can go with a boxcar or a large-scale program of urban mass transit. electric subways, electric trolleys, cheap, convenient, attractive, comfortable, safe, urban mass transit to take cars off the road. And similar things, right? You can modernize all kinds of infrastructure to reduce the emission of carbon. Sure, that's fine. You can prepare the Port of New York and other ports for a repetition of Superstorm Sandy. You can take that Dutch system of protecting against flood surges and storm surges, and you can implement that in the main ports of the United States. You can do all that. But cap and trade, Wall Street, speculation, rip-offs, not in a million years. Back in a minute. The other thing I wanted to point to concerning global warming, you're going to tell me that that's the main problem of the world? I'm sorry. I tried to find new statistics. I was looking today for post-2008, 2009 statistics on how many people die every day from malnutrition, starvation, and these diseases, diarrhea and so forth, that can be cured for pennies. We can even add not just tuberculosis, but malaria, right? Killing millions every year. The best I could find was that in 2007, 21,000 kids per day died of malnutrition and starvation. That is to say, in the year 2010, this is a little bit more recent, in 2010 it was 7.6 million children under the age of 5, but that, of course, leaves out everybody else. I would have to estimate that the number of deaths is somewhere in the area of 30 to 40,000 per day. These are cadavers, not threats, not hypotheticals, dead bodies every day. And you can't tell me, as long as that goes on, that the fate of the pelicans, the penguins, the polar bears, and the snail darters and all the rest of this stuff, the spotted owl, that all of that weighs more than 30, 40,000 human beings every day, including 21,000 children as of 2007, and I'm sure it's worse than that now. Now, on the this rents program this week, let me just try to sum this up. I tried to link the monstrosity of the Cloven Bundy phenomenon, right? Actual white supremacist armed checkpoints being tolerated by the federal authorities here in the United States, right? This cannot go on for long. Maybe other militias will come forward to challenge them because maybe there's some other group that wants to come forward with weaponry, right, to challenge them. But this is exactly what we cannot have. We must have the monopoly of law and force on the part of the federal government. And again, the libertarians, they're going to scream like stuck pigs. That sounds bad, I agree, except when you consider the alternative, because if you don't have the federal government monopoly on law and armed force, then what are you going to have? You're going to have the do-it-yourself white supremacist gangs of Cloven Bundy. You're going to have Ron Kokesh come forward with his libertarians marching through the black neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. with loaded rifles, and on and on. And this is exactly what you cannot have. Now, this neo-feudalism. Surprise, neo-feudalism. Surprise that the Rockefellers, the Koches, and others have decided to fund neo-feudalist ideologies and social formations. And I wanted to point you back to two historical parallels. The Holy Roman Empire, where this was Germany, right, up until about the Napoleonic years, no central authority, no taxation of the nobility, and you had either 300 mini-states, or if you wanted to, you could extend that to 2,000 so-called independent entities if you add in these imperial knights. And they were always yelling about their German liberties and so forth. And the example that I wanted to point to was this infamous cuius regio eius religio, the lord of the state, the duke, the count, the prince, whatever he is. He essentially owns this little principality or dukedom, and he tells everybody what their religion is going to be. And that is Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby says, you work for us, we get to dictate your religion, in the sense that we get to tell you whether or not you're allowed to have birth control or transfusions or organ transplants or vaccinations or life support, whatever it is. Then, and that, of course, doomed the Holy Roman Empire. Then we have Poland, and Poland at this point includes that entire area of Western Ukraine where the fascists are currently the strongest. And this is the example in Europe of a country where the landed aristocracy, the landowners, people like Cloven Bundy, won out completely over everybody else, right? The cities were composed of Germans and Jews, and they had no rights, no vote, even though that's, obviously where the wealth and commerce came from. But the Schlachta, the lower nobility, and the magnates, the higher nobility, they dictated what they want. And in the Diet, it was an elective monarchy, just like the Holy Roman Empire. The king was elected when the old one died, and this made for a very weak form of government. The key phrase with Poland is the liberum veto, that out of an assembly of several hundred oligarchs, landowners, or their representatives, it took just one vote to stop the entire thing. And not just stop it, not just say, I will not tolerate this measure, but to explode the Diet. Everybody goes home, and if you've been there for 2 or 3 months, passing all kinds of measures, all of that is canceled, abrogated, rolled back, no result. If at the end of the session, on the very last vote, one crackpot oligarch paid by the French, the Swedes, the Russians, the Prussians, or whoever it was, says no. That's the filibuster. And exploding the Diet. Well, you look at the current Congress. Our current Congress is essentially exploded. It doesn't pass anything. We're getting nowhere. Paralysis, the inability to respond. And the other one in this Polish Republic Commonwealth is the right of confederation. That is, even the liberum veto was not enough. If something was happening still that you really wanted to fight against, you had the right to go out and assemble an armed gang and private army, if you want, to fight against other private armies or against the central government. So, as we heard, and again, I recommend there are any number of good studies of this. The King of Poland had essentially no courts, no army, no power of taxation, and this doomed the country, so much so that these neighboring countries, Russia, Prussia, would all say, oh, no, we won't allow you to roll back this wonderful libertarian liberum veto. So the monopoly of law and force, characteristic of the modern state, failed to develop in Poland. The King of Poland had practically no army, no law courts, no officials, and no income. The nobility paid no taxes. And this is the German case and the Polish case. The nobility, the landowners, refused to be taxed. And instead, if you threaten to tax them, they assemble private armies. That's Cloven Bundy. That's the negation of civilization. This is absolutely off the charts. And, of course, Poland, the German case is that it's these small states, right, local control. Right? Let's have 300 or even 2,000 countries in the territory of Germany, the crazy quilt and crazy politics. In the case of Poland, it's all theoretically one country, but it's actually controlled by about a dozen magnates, top oligarchs, and so forth. So in Germany, the local lord is going to tell you, hey, guess what, you're a Catholic, or guess what, you're a Calvinist, or you're a Lutheran, and that's what you've got to be. And in Poland, it's this entire monstrosity. I recommend, for a patriotic Polish view, the great historical painter Matejko, Matejko. You can see a sample of his work on Tarpley.net. Go to Tarpley.net. Take a look at Matejko. This is a painting from around the time of the American Civil War. The great Jesuit Skarga, whose name is on the front of the library here at Catholic University. Skarga, like Moses, giving an anathema, right, a really vigorous critique, condemnation to this collection of princes, magnates, oligarchs, and so forth, essentially saying they're destroying Poland. And take a look at the other works by Matejko as well. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Our last segment here already on the 9th of May. Now, concerning this question, right, the issue of whether there would be an efficient, centralized government in this country is largely has been determined by the American Civil War. And this past week, we've gone through some very important anniversaries in this. And we're talking, of course, about the battles of the Wilderness, which was this past Monday and Tuesday, and we're now into the anniversary of Spotsylvania Courthouse, a battle that went on from the 8th to the 21st of May. And we're looking then forward to the anniversary of the North Anna battle, Cold Harbor, and then Grant crossing the James River and attacking Petersburg, south of the James. And this is a stirring series of anniversaries. And in particular, I would like to point you to this fateful moment which occurred this past Wednesday. In other words, Wednesday was the 150th anniversary of this critical moment after the Wilderness. 2 days, huge battle of the Wilderness, 18,000 Union casualties, 12,000 Confederate, so a ratio of 3 to 2, but that ratio guarantees the defeat of the Confederacy because they cannot replace their losses because of their weakness, right? So their logistical weakness. So what we have is this moment, and all the commentators agree that this is a key moment. Right after the Wilderness, and this is on Wednesday of this past week. The battle is Monday and Tuesday of this past week. This key critical turning point moment, Wednesday, in particular Wednesday evening. And here's what it is. On the morning of May 7th, 1864, 150 years ago Wednesday, Grant ordered the Army of the Potomac to proceed from the Wilderness battlefield around the flank of Lee's Confederate Army to Spotsylvania Courthouse. He wrote the orders at 6:30 a.m. The wagon train started moving at 3 p.m. on the 7th, and the troops began marching at 8:30 in the evening. Sheridan and the cavalry guarded the right flank of the marching army, and he was, shielding this movement. And this is the beginning of the end of the Civil War in the Eastern Theater. And here's one version of it. This is Fletcher Pratt. So at the road is now going east, and the question is, they come to a crossroads, and will they go north back to Washington or south? Here's Fletcher Pratt. At Chancellorsville House, there is a three-cornered intersection. The road to the left led back to the Rappahannock, back to the Potomac, out of the grim woods to fortifications, comfort, and safety. And on the right, it was a road that led past the rebel front, deeper than ever into the perilous and uncertain Wilderness, as the defeated troops came slogging down to the turn. Defeated is maybe too much, but certainly bloodied and exhausted, came slugging down to the turn. The dispirited soldiers saw dimly a man in an old blue coat sitting on his horse at the crossroads with a cigar in his mouth. He silently motioned the guides of each regiment down the right-hand road. Grant. They stared for a moment, and then the slanting lines of steel took the road to terror and death, borne up on an uncontrollable wave of cheering. That night, the men were happy. All right, that's Fletcher Pratt. Now, here's another one. Here's Wilkeson, a Union soldier, Reflections of a Private in the Army of the Potomac. Grant's military standing with the enlisted men hung on the direction we turned after the Battle of Wilderness when the troops reached Chancellorsville House. If we went to the left, Grant was going to be put in the same category as Meade and Hooker and Burnside and Pope. Failures, people who would not fight total war. At the Chancellorsville House, we turned to the right. Instantly, all of us heard a cry of relief. Our spirits rose. We marched free. The men began to sing. The enlisted men understood the flanking movement. That night, we were happy. Now, here's a post-war article by General Horace Porter, and this is from the Century magazine, right? These are the ones that found their way into the collection, Battles and Leaders of the Civil War. Here's what Porter says. He's a general with the Army of Grant. The soldiers, weary and sleepy after the long battle on Monday and Tuesday, with stiffened limbs and smarting wounds, sprang to their feet, forgetful of their pains, and rushed forward to the roadside. Wild cheers echoed through the forest, and glad shouts of triumph rent the air. Men swung their hats, tossed up their arms, and pressed forward to within touch of their chief, Grant, clapping their hands and speaking to him with the familiarity of comrades. Pine knots and leaves were set on fire and lighted the scene with their weird flickering glare. The night march had become a triumphal procession for the new commander. The demonstration was emphatic, was the verdict pronounced by the troops in Grant's favor on the first battle in the East. So that's the moment where Grant says, look, I'm not going to be like these other set-piece generals. This is the trip to total war, modern war, right? In the modern war, you don't have a battle and then go home for 2 months. It's continuous. And now Grant imposes that for the first time, right? All during May, and within 1 month or 5 weeks of setting out from Washington, he has besieged Petersburg, and Lee knows that it's only a question of time. And I submit to you, the cause of human freedom and human dignity was riding on Grant and the Army of the Potomac, because Lee is essentially a slaveholder of a slaveholders' rebellion, and the Army of Northern Virginia was the main manifestation of slavery in the Western Hemisphere. It was an army that if you were black, if you were captured by the Army of Northern Virginia in the Antietam campaign or the Gettysburg campaign, they would enslave you. They would kidnap you and put you into slavery. And it's when the famous Juneteenth anniversary in Texas, when the news comes to Texas that the Confederates are defeated, they no longer exist, and the Emancipation Proclamation is the law of the land. The thing that convinces the slaves of Texas that slavery is over is that Lee has surrendered and the Army of Northern Virginia has been destroyed. Now, let's just go back to Fletcher Pratt, see how much of this we can get in. What happened to Lee when he saw that Grant did not turn away, but was essentially closing in on him, and these iron claws were holding him, and he couldn't do anything? Lee was a more complicated or less specialized mechanism. He heard the news with incredulity and misgiving. Something incomprehensible had happened. He had fought on ground of his own choosing. His tactical touch had never been more exquisite. Longstreet's assault at the Wilderness had been delivered with indomitable fervor. The Federals were driven back at every point under losses that should have shaken them to the core. But The old sword, the invincible Durandal, had failed to bite. Instead of taking refuge behind the Rappahannock, the obstinate Federals were encircling his flank exactly as though they had won. This shock produced in Lee the first stages of a mental disintegration which it had been hitherto his privilege to inflict on others. For the first time in his life, he failed to write his wife for a week, and never again did he undertake a general assault on Grant's army. So there it is. The decisive moment, or one of the several of the Civil War, took place this past Wednesday, and that is the key to the modern world, the world of the modern nation state. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.